Hey friends, here is a quiet paradox to carry with you into the night. How can someone so difficult to admire, so blunt, so rarely gentle, become absolutely essential at the exact moment a fragile nation needs steadiness more than charm? History often celebrates the beloved, the eloquent, the magnetic, and yet sometimes survival depends on someone very different, someone stubborn, anxious, and unyielding in ways that are not immediately likable. Picture a modest room in colonial New England. Wooden walls creak softly as the night cools. A single candle burns low beside stacks of legal papers, their edges smudged with ink and worry. Outside, the street is quiet, but not peaceful. There is tension in the air, the kind that comes when people sense change before they understand it. The smell of damp earth drifts in through a cracked window. Somewhere nearby, church bells mark time, steady and unavoidable. This is the world that shaped John Adams, a man whose life would be defined less by warmth than by necessity. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting off to these stories of great minds. And if you feel like it, leave a comment with your location and the local time where you're listening from right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. John Adams was born into a world where duty arrived early and comfort rarely did. Colonial America was not a place of grand certainty. It was a place of rules inherited from far away, laws written in another land, and expectations shaped by religion, community, and survival. People lived close to one another, but not always kindly. Reputation mattered. Discipline mattered. Emotion, especially uncontrolled emotion, was treated with suspicion. From early on, Adams absorbed this atmosphere deeply. He learned that life was not about ease, but about responsibility. One clear historical fact anchors this beginning. Adams was raised in a strict Puritan household in Massachusetts, where moral seriousness was not optional, it was assumed. Work, study, and self-scrutiny filled the days. Leisure was limited. Reflection was constant. There is a small human detail that hints at his inner life, even as a young man. Adams was known to keep journals, filling them with sharp self-criticism. He worried about his temper, his pride, his tendency to feel overlooked. Writing became a way to argue with himself, to wrestle his own impulses into order. Even at rest, his mind rarely softened. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Adams did not glide through social spaces. He bristled. He spoke too plainly. He felt slights deeply and remembered them longer than was useful. Some biographers still wonder whether this emotional intensity, this inability to let things slide, was a flaw that held him back, or the very quality that made him dependable when compromise became dangerous. As you lie listening now, you might sense the shape of the man beginning to form. Not smooth, not easy, but solid. Adams did not seek to be admired. He sought to be right. And in times of uncertainty, that difference matters more than it first appears. This story will not rush. It will move carefully, as Adams himself often did, thinking, worrying, insisting. For now, let the question linger quietly beside you. When everything is unstable, who do you want standing guard? Someone who makes you feel good? or someone who refuses to look away? We will return to that question slowly, together. The world John Adams entered was small in scale, but heavy with expectation. Colonial Massachusetts did not overwhelm the senses with grandeur. Instead, it pressed quietly on the mind. Streets were narrow. Houses stood close together, their wooden frames darkened by salt air and long winters. The rhythm of life was steady and disciplined. Work at dawn, meals taken simply, evenings shaped by scripture, conversation, and silence. This was a society built on order before comfort. Church bells did more than mark time. They reminded everyone that life was governed by rules larger than individual desire. Authority flowed from tradition, from England, from God, and from community expectations that were rarely questioned aloud. People learned early how to watch themselves, how to measure their behavior against what was acceptable. One clear historical fact defines this environment. Massachusetts in the early 18th century was still deeply shaped by Puritan values, even as the original religious fervor softened. Moral seriousness lingered. Public life and private conscience were tightly intertwined. To fail ethically was not merely personal, it was communal. For a child growing up in this atmosphere, there was little room to drift. John Adams learned to notice the weight of judgment early on. Neighbors remembered. Reputations lasted. A careless word or visible weakness could follow a person for years. This sharpened his awareness of how fragile standing could be, and how carefully one had to guard it. There is a small, telling detail often overlooked. Adams's father was respected in the community, a man associated with steadiness rather than brilliance. This mattered. It set a quiet standard: usefulness over charm, reliability over applause. Young Adams absorbed this lesson deeply, even as his temperament pushed against it. He wanted to excel. He wanted to be seen. And he feared constantly that he might fall short. The physical world reinforced this pressure. Winters were long and isolating. Light faded early. Candles burned down slowly in the evenings, forcing families into closeness and introspection. In these hours, the mind had little to distract it. Thoughts repeated. Worries echoed. For someone already inclined toward intensity, such quiet could be both sharpening and exhausting. Some historians raise an open question here. Did growing up in such a morally watchful environment make Adams unusually sensitive to criticism later in life? The evidence suggests it did. Praise never fully satisfied him. Disapproval lingered far too long. At the same time, this world trained him to endure scrutiny. Being watched became normal. Accountability was not resented. It was expected. This would later shape how Adams understood public duty, not as a performance, but as a burden one carried visibly, whether one liked it or not. As you listen now, notice how the tone of the story remains restrained. There are no dramatic turning points yet. Only atmosphere, only pressure slowly applied. This was a world that did not encourage ease, but it did encourage seriousness. And seriousness, when history begins to tremble, can be a rare and necessary thing. The night can hold this setting quietly. Streets dim, candles flicker, expectations settle in. John Adams was being shaped not by excitement, but by constant, disciplined awareness of responsibility. long before he ever knew how much would be asked of him. John Adams's childhood unfolded under the steady gaze of expectation, but it was not free from quiet wounds. They were not dramatic injuries that announced themselves loudly. They were subtler, formed from temperament, comparison, and the early realization that approval did not come easily to him. He was a bright child, quick with words and ideas, but also restless and sensitive. Praise, when it came, never felt complete. Criticism, when it appeared, lingered far longer than it should have. Adams noticed this about himself early on, and it unsettled him. He wanted certainty about his worth, about his direction, but his own mind rarely gave it to him. One clear historical fact grounds these years. Adams was educated locally and later sent to Harvard College at a young age, entering an institution that prized discipline, logic, and moral seriousness. This was not a place for indulgence or ease. It sharpened the intellect, but it also sharpened comparison. Among peers who seemed more naturally confident or socially fluid, Adams felt himself constantly measuring, constantly striving. There is a small, human detail that captures this inner tension. Adams kept detailed journals even as a young man, using them to dissect his thoughts, motives, and failings with almost relentless honesty. He scolded himself on the page for vanity, for anger, for wanting recognition. Writing was not comfort. It was discipline. He treated his own mind as something that needed firm governance. This habit reveals an early wound, the sense that he could not trust himself to drift. Ease felt dangerous. Relaxation felt like moral risk. Some biographers still wonder whether Adams' lifelong seriousness was less a natural disposition and more a learned defense, an attempt to stay ahead of his own perceived flaws. At Harvard, Adams studied broadly, but he did not find immediate peace there. He wrestled with ambition and doubt side by side. He wanted to matter, yet feared the cost of wanting too much. He admired excellence in others, while resenting how effortlessly it seemed to come to them. This mixture of admiration and irritation would follow him into adulthood. There was also a deeper feeling of not fitting neatly into expected roles. Adams respected authority, but he questioned it instinctively. He valued order, yet bristled under condescension. He believed in hierarchy, but resisted being diminished by it. These contradictions did not resolve. They hardened into character. Another open question lingers over this period. Did Adams' early sense of being emotionally out of step with others make him less adaptable? Or did it make him more independent in judgment? The answer would not become clear until much later, when independence of judgment became not a liability, but a necessity. As you rest now, this stage of the story remains inward and quiet. No public achievements yet. No historic decisions. Just a young mind learning, often painfully, that approval is unreliable and self-command is essential. John Adams did not emerge from childhood with ease or confidence. He emerged with vigilance, with an instinct to hold himself to account before others could, with a sense that duty, once accepted, must be carried fully, even when it weighs heavily. This was not yet greatness. It was preparation, formed in silence, sharpened by discomfort, and guided by a growing belief that responsibility, not admiration, would define the worth of a life. Early adulthood brought John Adams into the world not as a student, but as a participant, and the world did not welcome him gently. The habits formed in childhood followed him closely: vigilance, intensity, and a tendency to experience every success and failure as a measure of personal worth. What changed was the scale. Mistakes now carried public consequence. One clear historical fact anchors this period. After graduating from Harvard, Adams initially struggled to find his place, teaching school before turning decisively toward the study of law. Teaching paid the bills, but it did not satisfy him. He felt restless, constrained, and impatient with routine. Law, by contrast, promised structure, argument, and purpose, an arena where rigor mattered more than charm. Yet, the transition was not smooth. Adams doubted himself constantly. He worried that his temperament, quick to bristle, slow to forgive, would undermine him. Courtrooms required persuasion, patience, and restraint. These did not come naturally. Early on, he made missteps, speaking too forcefully, pushing arguments too hard, failing to read the room. Each error stayed with him longer than it should have. There is a small human detail that reveals how he responded. Adams reread his own legal writings obsessively, marking passages he felt were too sharp, too proud, too careless. Improvement, for him, was not gradual easing. It was correction through effort. He believed discipline could compensate for temperament if applied relentlessly. Failure arrived often enough to matter. Cases were lost. Opportunities slipped by. Colleagues advanced more quickly. Adams noticed all of it. Some biographers still wonder whether these early frustrations hardened his resolve, or fed a lifelong defensiveness that never quite relaxed. The truth seems to be both. Each setback reinforced his belief that success required vigilance, not ease. At the same time, law began to shape his thinking in a lasting way. He grew attached to procedure, precedent, and the idea that rules, properly applied, could restrain passion and power alike. This belief would later guide him in moments of national crisis, but in these early years, it simply offered reassurance. When emotions ran high, structure felt safe. Another open question lingers here. Did Adams choose law because it suited his moral instincts, or because it gave him tools to control his own intensity? His journals suggest both motivations were at work. Law was not only a profession, it was a discipline for the self. As you listen now, the story remains grounded in effort rather than triumph. Adams was not discovering greatness. He was learning endurance, how to keep going when recognition lagged, when temperament complicated progress, when doubt refused to fade. This period did not soften him. It steadied him. Through trial, error, and repeated self-correction, Adams began to trust something more durable than approval: the quiet knowledge that he could be relied upon to do what he believed was right, even when it cost him ease. That reliability, earned slowly without glamour, would soon be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. Marriage altered John Adams's life not by calming him, but by grounding him. Where much of his world felt adversarial, full of judgment, rivalry, and unspoken tests, his partnership with Abigail offered something rare: an intellectual equal who neither flattered nor retreated from him. It was not comfort in the soft sense, it was steadiness. One clear historical fact anchors this turning point. John Adams married Abigail Smith in 1764, beginning one of the most documented and consequential marriages in early American history. Their correspondence would span decades, revealing a relationship built on candor, mutual respect, and shared moral seriousness. Abigail did not smooth Adams's edges. She understood them. She challenged his impatience, questioned his assumptions, and encouraged his ambitions without indulging his anxieties. This mattered deeply. Adams had always feared that intimacy might weaken resolve. Instead, he discovered that honest companionship could strengthen it. There is a small, human detail that captures the texture of their bond. Adams often wrote to Abigail not only about public matters, but about his fears, his temper, his doubts, his exhaustion. He complained, he worried, he reflected. Writing to her became a way of ordering his thoughts, of testing ideas in a space where disagreement did not threaten respect. For a man who struggled to feel understood, this was anchoring. Yet even here, Adams did not find ease. He missed Abigail intensely during long separations. He worried about her safety, her health, the burden placed on her while he pursued public duty. Some biographers still ask an open question at this stage. Did Adams' sense of responsibility toward Abigail deepen his sense of duty toward the nation? Or did it sharpen the tension between private obligation and public service? The evidence suggests both pulled at him constantly. Marriage also exposed Adams to a broader moral vision. Abigail's insights, particularly her awareness of inequality, education, and the limits placed on women, quietly expanded his thinking. He did not always agree. He did listen. This habit of listening, once learned at home, would later influence how he approached dissent in public life. At the same time, his professional world grew more demanding. Legal practice expanded. Political tensions intensified. Adams felt himself being drawn toward conflict he did not seek, but could not ignore. Through it all, Abigail remained a fixed point. Not a refuge from responsibility, but a reminder of why responsibility mattered. As you rest now, this section of the story softens slightly. There is warmth here, but it is not sentimental. It is earned. Adams did not become gentler overnight. He remained sharp, opinionated, and easily provoked. What changed was that he was no longer alone with those traits. Marriage did not replace his inner struggle. It gave it context. It gave him a witness, someone who knew his flaws and stayed anyway. And in that staying, Adams learned something essential: that firmness and connection do not cancel each other out. This lesson would follow him into every storm that lay ahead. When isolation threatened to harden him, memory of this partnership would pull him back toward balance. Duty would still demand sacrifice, but it would no longer be abstract. It would be personal. Public life did not arrive for John Adams as an ambition fulfilled. It arrived as an intrusion, unwelcome, necessary, and impossible to ignore. The political tensions that had once hovered at the edges of his legal practice now demanded attention. Neutrality began to feel like a decision in itself, and silence like a form of consent. One clear historical fact marks this turning point. As British authority tightened its grip on the colonies through new taxes and enforcement, Adams emerged as a vocal critic of parliamentary overreach, arguing that law without representation undermined the moral legitimacy of governance. His objections were legal in form, but ethical at their core. Adams did not enjoy this role. He disliked crowds, distrusted slogans, and bristled at emotional appeals. Where others thrived on public energy, he found it draining, and yet he could not look away. The legal principles he had come to rely on, procedure, fairness, restraint, were being tested by power exercised at a distance, indifferent to local consequence. There is a small human detail that reveals his inner state during these years. Adams often returned home from meetings restless and irritable, replaying arguments in his mind long after they had ended. Sleep did not come easily. His journals from this period are filled with sharp self-interrogation. Did I speak too harshly? Did I concede too much? Did I fail to say what needed saying? Public duty intensified his private anxiety rather than relieving it. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Was Adams driven into resistance by conviction or by an inability to tolerate hypocrisy? The answer likely lies in the intersection of both. He could endure hardship. He could endure unpopularity. What he could not endure was the feeling that principles were being quietly abandoned for convenience. As tensions escalated, Adams found himself increasingly isolated from moderates who hoped compromise might preserve peace. He understood their desire, he shared their fear of conflict, but he also sensed that delay carried its own danger, that avoiding confrontation might hollow out the very laws meant to protect order. This inner conflict shaped his tone. Adams argued fiercely, but rarely theatrically. He appealed to reason rather than passion. He insisted that resistance, to be legitimate, must remain grounded in law rather than revenge. This insistence did not always endear him to allies. Some found him inflexible. Others found him exhausting. Adams accepted this with resignation rather than surprise. As you listen now, the story remains deliberately restrained. There are no crowds cheering yet, no declarations ringing through history. Only a man stepping further into visibility than he prefers, because retreat would feel like betrayal of everything he had trained himself to respect. Public life did not soften Adams. It clarified him. It forced him to decide what mattered more: personal peace or public integrity. He chose integrity, not because it promised success, but because it allowed him to live with himself. This choice did not bring comfort. It brought friction, sleeplessness, and increasing scrutiny. But it also brought alignment. For the first time, Adams's inner discipline and outer actions began to move in the same direction. That alignment, hard-won and uneasy, would soon place him in moments where principle demanded not argument, but sacrifice. The moment that would define John Adams's moral reputation did not arrive with applause or triumph. It arrived with outrage, directed at him personally, and with the clear knowledge that doing what he believed was right would cost him trust, popularity, and perhaps his future. One clear historical fact anchors this moment. In 1770, after the Boston Massacre, John Adams agreed to defend British soldiers accused of killing colonial civilians. In an atmosphere thick with anger and grief, this choice felt to many like betrayal. Passions were high. Crowds demanded punishment. The soldiers were already condemned in the court of public opinion. Adams understood the risk immediately. He did not believe the soldiers were innocent in every sense, but he believed something else mattered more: that justice must not collapse under pressure. If the law bent to rage, then the very principles the colonies claimed to defend would be hollow. For Adams, this was not a clever legal maneuver. It was a test of whether order could survive emotion. There is a small human detail that reveals how deeply this decision troubled him. Adams later wrote that accepting the defense was one of the most anxious choices of his life. He knew his livelihood could suffer. He knew neighbors would look at him differently. And they did. Business declined. Friendships cooled. The silence around him grew heavier. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams take this case out of pure principle? Or did his temperament, his resistance to crowd emotion, make him especially unwilling to yield? The answer may be inseparable. His character and his convictions reinforced one another. He could not tolerate the idea that justice should belong only to the popular. In court, Adams argued calmly and precisely. He did not deny the tragedy. He did not inflame sympathy for the soldiers. He insisted only that facts mattered, that evidence mattered, that law must function even when it was uncomfortable. The result was partial acquittal, a verdict that satisfied no one emotionally, but preserved the integrity of the legal process. The cost lingered. Adams was not celebrated. He was endured. Yet privately, something settled within him. He had acted in alignment with his deepest belief that the rule of law must stand above faction, even when it isolates the one who defends it. As you rest now, this moment invites a softer reflection. Moral courage does not always look like defiance shouted from rooftops. Sometimes it looks like standing quietly where you know you will be misunderstood. Sometimes it means choosing loneliness over approval. This experience hardened Adams in one sense and steadied him in another. He became less interested in being liked and more committed to being necessary. The distinction mattered. It freed him from chasing consensus and anchored him to principle. From this point on, Adams would never fully escape controversy. But he had crossed an internal threshold. He had learned that integrity could survive isolation, and that survival, in moments of crisis, might be the most important service a person could offer. After the Boston Massacre trial, John Adams did not step into relief. He stepped into clarity. The storm had passed, but the air around him felt permanently altered. He was now known, not as a man who pleased crowds, but as one who resisted them. That reputation would follow him closely, shaping both opportunity and isolation. One clear historical fact anchors this period. In the years following the trial, Adams became increasingly involved in colonial resistance, serving in local and regional assemblies where tensions with Britain sharpened into open defiance. His voice carried weight now, not because it soothed, but because it was trusted to be serious. This trust came at a personal cost. Adams felt himself increasingly separated from ordinary life. Friends measured their words around him. Strangers projected expectations onto him that he never fully felt capable of carrying. He was useful, but usefulness is a lonely form of respect. There is a small human detail that reveals how he lived with this pressure. Adams continued to write obsessively in his journals, recording not only events, but his emotional reactions to them. He scolded himself for pride one day, for timidity the next. The page became a private courtroom where he prosecuted and defended himself relentlessly. Rest rarely entered the proceedings. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adam's habit of self-judgment sharpen his moral clarity, or did it prevent him from ever feeling at peace with his choices? The evidence suggests both were true. He made decisions carefully, but rarely rested in them. As resistance hardened, Adams found himself aligned with others who shared his seriousness, though not always his temperament. Meetings grew longer. Language grew sharper. The possibility of reconciliation with Britain dimmed. Adams did not celebrate this. He mourned it quietly. He had never wanted rupture for its own sake. But he believed there were moments when avoiding rupture was more dangerous than enduring it. This belief placed him firmly among those willing to imagine independence, not as a dream, but as a burden that might soon have to be carried. Adams understood that separation would not bring immediate freedom or happiness. It would bring instability, risk, and sacrifice. His temperament, inclined toward caution and realism, was well suited to such a vision. As you listen now, the story settles into a steady forward motion. The dramatic moral test has passed, but its consequences continue to unfold. Adams's inner world remains tense, disciplined, and vigilant. Ease is still absent, but purpose is becoming clearer. He was no longer simply reacting to events. He was helping shape them, often reluctantly, always seriously. And though admiration still eluded him, something more durable was forming: reliability under strain. The night can hold this stage gently. It is a moment of transition rather than climax. Adams is moving from principle tested in isolation to principle exercised in history. The weight is increasing. So is the need for someone who will not look away when the path ahead offers no comfort. When John Adams crossed the Atlantic to represent the colonies abroad, he carried more than documents and instructions. He carried the full weight of uncertainty about the revolution, about himself, and about whether a fledgling cause could persuade ancient powers to take it seriously. One clear historical fact anchors this stage. Adams served as a diplomat in Europe during the American Revolutionary period, tasked with securing recognition, loans, and alliances at a time when the outcome of the war was far from certain. France, the Netherlands, and Britain itself watched the conflict cautiously, weighing interest against risk. For Adams, diplomacy was deeply uncomfortable terrain. He was not naturally subtle. He disliked flattery and distrusted charm. European courts, with their rituals, insinuations, and unspoken hierarchies, felt artificial to him, almost dishonest. He preferred plain argument to polished performance, even when plainness risked offense. There is a small, human detail that captures this discomfort. Adams often complained in private letters about the exhaustion of constant social obligation, formal dinners, layered etiquette, and conversations that never quite said what they meant. He missed the directness of home. He missed Abigail. The distance sharpened his irritability and deepened his loneliness. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams's blunt honesty hinder his diplomatic effectiveness, or did it quietly earn trust in a world weary of manipulation? The answer appears mixed. He struggled socially, but he proved relentless in pursuit of tangible outcomes. He did not charm. He persisted. Adams believed deeply that the American cause must be treated as legitimate, not pitied. He refused to present the colonies as desperate dependents. Instead, he argued that they were emerging equals, worthy of respect and partnership. This stance required confidence he did not always feel, but conviction carried him when comfort did not. The strain of this work was immense. Negotiations moved slowly. Setbacks were frequent. Financial pressures mounted. Adams felt keenly the fear that failure abroad would doom the revolution at home. Yet he did not retreat. Each obstacle reinforced his sense that independence, if it came at all, would arrive through endurance rather than brilliance. As you rest now, this stage of the story carries a quiet fatigue. The excitement of resistance has given way to long waiting, cultural dislocation, and persistent doubt. Adams' temperament, ill-suited to ease but well-suited to persistence, proved unexpectedly valuable. He was not the diplomat people admired most. He was the one who stayed when patience wore thin. And in a struggle defined as much by waiting as by fighting, that steadiness mattered more than applause. Victory did not arrive for John Adams as celebration. It arrived as exhaustion, tempered by a sober awareness of how fragile success could be. Even as the revolutionary cause gained ground, Adams felt little inclination toward triumph. He had seen too much uncertainty, too many reversals, to believe that history ever settled cleanly. One clear historical fact anchors this stage. Adams played a key role in negotiating the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which formally ended the American Revolutionary War and secured independence for the United States. The achievement was monumental. Yet for Adams, it felt less like an ending than a pause, an uncertain breath taken after years of strain. There is a small, human detail that reveals his emotional state at this moment. Rather than reveling in recognition, Adams worried incessantly about what would come next. Independence, he believed, solved nothing on its own. It removed one form of authority, but it did not guarantee wisdom in what replaced it. His thoughts returned repeatedly to the dangers of faction, ambition, and complacency. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams ever allow himself to feel pride in this accomplishment? Or did his temperament deny him that rest? His writings suggest fleeting satisfaction quickly overtaken by concern. He trusted outcomes only when they were guarded by continued effort. Returning to public life after diplomacy, Adams encountered a nation unsure of itself. There was excitement, certainly, but also confusion. Systems of governance were still fragile. Loyalties shifted. Ideals clashed with practical demands. Adams felt at home in this discomfort. He had never expected ease from independence. He had expected responsibility. His approach to politics remained consistent. He argued for strong institutions, clear laws, and balanced power. He distrusted extremes, whether of passion or idealism. To some, this caution felt uninspiring. To Adams, it felt necessary. Freedom without structure, he believed, invited collapse. As you listen now, the tone remains restrained. There is no swelling music here, no final victory march, only the quiet recognition that revolutions do not end when treaties are signed. They continue in habits, laws, and daily restraint. Adams' role in securing independence did not soften him. It confirmed him. He had seen what persistence could achieve, and how easily it could be undone. From this point forward, his concern would not be how to win freedom, but how to keep it from destroying itself. As the new nation struggled to define itself, John Adams found that peace brought its own kind of strain. War had demanded urgency and sacrifice. Peace demanded patience, restraint, and a tolerance for imperfection that did not come easily to him. The external enemy was gone. Internal tensions remained. One clear historical fact anchors this phase. Adams served as the first Vice President of the United States, a role he found deeply frustrating and ill-defined. The office carried little real power, offering neither the clarity of law nor the urgency of diplomacy. He presided over the Senate, enforced procedure, and waited. For a man accustomed to responsibility, waiting felt like erosion. There is a small, human detail that captures his discomfort. Adams once described the vice presidency as the most insignificant office ever invented, a remark half humorous and half bitter. The humor masked a deeper unease. He feared irrelevance, not because he craved attention, but because he believed idleness in public service was dangerous. Duty, to him, required motion. During these years, Adams watched political factions harden. Personal rivalries sharpened into ideological divides. Public discourse grew louder, less careful. He worried that the discipline required to win independence was already fading. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams' impatience with party politics make him out of step with the emerging democratic culture? Or was he warning against a real danger too early to be seen clearly? His temperament did not soften with age. He remained blunt, easily irritated, and deeply earnest. Yet beneath this surface, there was consistency. Adams continued to argue for balance between liberty and order, passion and restraint. He feared that untempered enthusiasm could undo what sacrifice had built. As you rest now, this part of the story carries a quiet tension. There is no crisis yet, but there is unease. Adams senses fragility everywhere. He does not trust success to sustain itself, and so he remains vigilant, even when the role he occupies offers little room to act. This vigilance, uncomfortable and thankless, is part of what makes him irreplaceable. Not because he was admired, but because he refused to relax when relaxation felt premature. When John Adams stepped into the presidency, it was not with confidence, but with reluctance shaped by long experience. He understood power too well to romanticize it. He understood public opinion too well to trust it. The office did not elevate him, it weighed on him. One clear historical fact defines this moment. John Adams became the second President of the United States in 1797, inheriting a nation caught between foreign danger and internal division. Revolutionary France and Great Britain were locked in conflict, and both expected American allegiance. Neutrality was fragile. Provocation was constant. For Adams, this was not a theoretical dilemma. He remembered how easily wars began, and how rarely they ended cleanly. His instinct was restraint, not because he feared confrontation, but because he feared unnecessary bloodshed. This placed him immediately at odds with powerful voices within his own government who saw conflict as inevitable, even useful. There is a small, human detail that reveals the emotional texture of these early presidential years. Adams often rose before dawn, pacing alone, reviewing correspondence in silence before others arrived. These early hours were when doubt pressed hardest. Decisions made during the day could not be undone. He knew this, and he felt it. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams caution save the nation from premature war, or did it weaken his standing at a moment when confidence might have unified the public? The tension between those interpretations has never fully resolved, and perhaps never should. Adams' presidency unfolded without dramatic flourish. There were no sweeping speeches that captured the imagination. Instead, there were long deliberations, tense meetings, and unpopular restraint. He resisted calls to escalate conflict with France, even as insults mounted and political pressure intensified. His refusal to rush toward war would become one of his most consequential and least celebrated decisions. The emotional cost was high. Adams felt isolated, criticized from all sides. Allies doubted him. Opponents mocked him. He had little talent for soothing rhetoric and little interest in cultivating popularity. This left him exposed, yet he did not reverse course. Integrity, once chosen, became immovable. As you listen now, the story settles into a sober cadence. This is leadership without applause. Courage expressed through patience rather than force. Adams' sadness, his lifelong awareness of fragility, made him unwilling to gamble with lives for pride or reputation. This is where his irreplaceability becomes visible. Not in brilliance or inspiration, but in refusal. Refusal to escalate. Refusal to perform strength when restraint was required. Refusal to confuse noise with necessity. The night holds this moment gently. You do not need to decide whether Adams was right or wrong. You can simply notice how moral courage sometimes looks like standing still while others demand motion, and how difficult that stillness can be. Pressure has a way of clarifying character, and for John Adams, the pressure of the presidency stripped away any remaining illusions about how lonely moral restraint could feel. The nation was young, proud, and easily provoked. Voices around him grew louder, more insistent, demanding decisive action that looked like strength. Adams felt the pull of those demands and resisted them. One clear historical fact anchors this stage. During Adams's presidency, tensions with France escalated into what became known as the Quasi-War, an undeclared naval conflict marked by seizures, insults, and public outrage. Many expected full-scale war to follow. Adams did not. There is a small, human detail that reveals how deeply this choice weighed on him. Adams reread his own letters repeatedly before sending them, sometimes delaying decisions not out of indecision, but out of fear that a single careless phrase could push the nation past a point of return. Words, once released, could become weapons. He treated them as such. The pressure did not come only from abroad. Within his own party, Adams faced fierce opposition. Some believed war would unify the country. Others saw it as an opportunity for power. Adams suspected something darker, that enthusiasm for conflict often disguised impatience with restraint. He had seen this pattern before. He did not trust it. Some historians still ask an open question here. Did Adams's stubborn independence preserve American lives, or did it fracture political unity at a critical moment? The answer depends on what one values more, immediate cohesion or long-term stability. Adams chose stability, even as it isolated him. Emotionally, this period was draining. Adams was not built for constant hostility. He felt criticism keenly. His temper flared more often now, though he worked to contain it. He confided privately that he felt misunderstood not just by opponents, but by allies who mistook caution for weakness. Yet he did not retreat. Instead, Adams authorized diplomatic efforts even when they were deeply unpopular. He believed negotiation, however humiliating it might appear, was preferable to war, whose consequences could not be controlled. This belief was not naive. It was earned from decades of watching how easily ideals collapsed once violence began. As you rest now, the narrative slows slightly, reflecting the weight of sustained resistance. This is courage without the relief of resolution. No clear victory, no moment when doubt dissolves. Only persistence. Adams' presidency is often remembered for what it did not do, for the war it avoided, for the restraint it practiced. This absence of spectacle makes it easy to overlook. But absence can be a form of presence. The lives not lost, the paths not taken, the damage quietly prevented. The night can hold this realization gently. Moral courage does not always announce itself with triumph. Sometimes it endures quietly, absorbing criticism so others may never know what was narrowly avoided. Section 14. When the crisis with France finally began to ease, John Adams did not feel vindicated. There was no surge of triumph, no sense that history had proven him right in a way that could be enjoyed. Instead, there was a quieter realization. Restraint, once exercised, rarely rewards the one who practices it. It simply leaves fewer scars behind. One clear historical fact marks this moment. Adams' decision to pursue peace negotiations with France ultimately succeeded, ending the quasi-war without a full declaration of conflict. The nation avoided a large-scale war that many had believed inevitable. This outcome, though consequential, did little to soften the political damage Adams had already absorbed. There is a small, human detail that reveals how he received this result. Rather than celebrating, Adams expressed relief tinged with weariness. He seemed less interested in credit than in confirmation that catastrophe had been avoided. Peace, for him, was not a victory condition. It was a fragile state that needed constant guarding. Politically, the cost was severe. Adams's independence alienated powerful allies. His refusal to conform fractured his own party. He felt this fracture personally. Loyalty mattered deeply to him, and betrayal, or what felt like betrayal, cut sharply. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams underestimate how much political unity mattered to the survival of his influence? Or did he knowingly sacrifice influence to protect the nation? His actions suggest the latter, though the price was painful. Emotionally, this period was marked by isolation. Adams trusted fewer voices. He withdrew inward, relying more heavily on his own judgment and on private correspondence with Abigail. Her letters continued to steady him, reminding him that public rejection did not erase private worth. Yet even this comfort was limited. Adams had never been good at releasing resentment, and the wounds of these years lingered. As you listen now, the story enters a quieter emotional register. The urgency of decision has passed. What remains is consequence. Adams is left to live with outcomes that history will judge long after he no longer has a voice in the matter. This is often the fate of restraint. It prevents disaster without creating spectacle. It preserves life without creating legend. Adams understood this more clearly than most. He did not expect gratitude. He expected misunderstanding. And still, he chose restraint. The night can hold this moment easily. It is a pause between storms, not a conclusion. Adams's role is shifting again, from guardian in crisis to figure gradually moving out of the center. The weight he carried does not lift. It changes shape. And in that change, another lesson quietly forms, that some forms of courage do not age into glory. They age into silence. And silence, though rarely praised, can be a gift. The end of John Adams's presidency arrived not with resolution, but with a strange mixture of disappointment and release. Losing re-election was painful. There is no reason to soften that truth, but it also brought a quiet, almost reluctant relief. The constant strain of holding the center, of resisting pressure from every side, had taken its toll. One clear historical fact anchors this transition. Adams lost the election of 1800 in a bitterly contested contest that reshaped American politics and confirmed the rise of organized parties. Power passed peacefully to his rival. For the young republic, this mattered enormously. For Adams personally, it felt like exile. There is a small human detail that reveals how he experienced this moment. Adams left the Capitol early on Inauguration Day, avoiding the ceremony altogether. This was not theatrical defiance, it was self-protection. He knew his emotions too well to trust himself to sit and watch power transfer to someone who had opposed him so fiercely. Distance felt safer than display. Some historians still ask an open question here. Did Adams's early departure reflect wounded pride, or a deliberate effort to preserve dignity and stability? The answer may be both. He was deeply hurt, but he was also unwilling to let personal resentment disturb a peaceful transition, something he believed mattered more than his own feelings. Retirement did not immediately bring peace. Adams carried bitterness with him. He replayed arguments, decisions, betrayals. He felt misunderstood by the public and misrepresented by opponents. His journals from this period are sharp, even angry at times. The habit of self-scrutiny did not soften with age. Yet distance also brought perspective. Removed from daily conflict, Adams began to see his presidency less as a failure and more as a necessary holding action. He had not expanded power. He had not inspired crowds, but he had preserved space for law, for peace, for continuity. This realization did not erase the pain of rejection, but it gave it meaning. As you listen now, the tone of the story eases slightly. The pace slows. The noise of politics fades into memory. Adams is no longer required to decide every day. The weight he carried for so long begins, very gradually, to set down. This moment is not redemption. It is rest, partial and imperfect. A man who spent his life bracing against chaos finally steps back, uncertain of how history will judge him, but quietly confident that he did not abandon his principles when it mattered most. The night holds this turning point gently. There is something deeply human here. The knowledge that doing what one believes is right does not guarantee reward, and yet choosing otherwise would have been unbearable. Section 16, retirement carried John Adams back to a quieter landscape. But quiet did not mean empty. The noise of politics fell away, yet the mind that had never learned to rest easily remained alert, reflective, and occasionally restless. The years ahead would not be defined by withdrawal, but by reconsideration. One clear historical fact anchors this stage of life. After leaving the presidency, Adams returned to his home in Massachusetts, where he would live for more than 2 decades, longer than he had lived before ever holding national power. This longevity gave him something rare among founders: time. Time to watch the nation grow without him. Time to think without immediate consequence. There is a small human detail that reveals how he adjusted. Adams fell into strict routines: morning walks, reading, writing letters, tending to daily habits with the same seriousness he once applied to public duty. Structure comforted him. Without it, old irritations surfaced too easily. Routine did not silence his thoughts, but it gave them rails. In these years, Adams's correspondence became his primary connection to the world. He wrote at length to family, to former rivals, to thinkers who challenged him. Writing allowed him to remain engaged without standing in the center. It was influence without authority, reflection without urgency. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams feel relief at no longer being responsible for outcomes? Or did the absence of duty leave him uneasy? His letters suggest both. He enjoyed the freedom to speak plainly, yet he missed the moral clarity that comes from necessity. When nothing demands decision, conviction can wander. Emotionally, Adams softened, but only slightly. Age did not erase resentment. Old wounds reopened easily. Yet there was also humor now, warmer and less defensive. He could laugh at himself more freely. The sharp edges dulled just enough to allow space for reconciliation. As you listen now, the story slows again. The stakes are no longer national, but personal. Adams is no longer shaping events. He is watching them, interpreting them, and occasionally correcting the record as he sees it. This shift does not diminish him. It completes him. The night holds this phase easily. A man who once carried the weight of restraint now carries memory. And memory, when given time, can become something gentler than judgment. Time, when it stretches long enough, has a way of softening even the most rigid convictions, not by erasing them, but by placing them in context. For John Adams, old age did not bring certainty. It brought perspective. And with perspective came a surprising, cautious peace. One clear historical fact anchors this chapter. In his later years, Adams resumed a long and thoughtful correspondence with his former rival, Thomas Jefferson, after years of silence and estrangement. The exchange was not immediate or easy. It unfolded slowly, through letters filled with memory, disagreement, humor, and shared reflection on what they had helped create. There is a small, human detail that reveals how meaningful this reconciliation was. Adams often reread Jefferson's letters before responding, sometimes waiting days before writing back. He wanted to be precise, not to win an argument, but to understand. This was new. In earlier life, he had rushed toward clarity. Now, he allowed ambiguity to remain. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams seek reconciliation out of loneliness, or out of a deeper recognition that history is larger than personal grievance? The letters suggest both. Age had narrowed his world, but it had also widened his sense of proportion. Old resentments, once sharp, began to feel heavy rather than useful. In these exchanges, Adams reflected openly on failure and restraint. He admitted misjudgments. He defended decisions. He questioned outcomes without bitterness. What emerges from the correspondence is not a softened man, but a steadier one, less driven by the need to justify himself, more willing to let history remain unresolved. This willingness mattered. It revealed something essential about Adams's moral courage. Even at the end of life, he was willing to revise, not principles, but posture. He could remain firm without remaining closed. For someone long defined by rigidity, this was no small achievement. As you listen now, the story enters a reflective calm. The urgency of politics has faded. What remains is dialogue, across distance, across disagreement, across time. Adams is no longer guarding the Republic from collapse. He is watching it learn how to live with its own contradictions. The night holds this moment gently. Reconciliation does not erase conflict. It places it in a larger frame, and in that frame, Adams found something he rarely allowed himself before: acceptance without surrender. As John Adams moved deeper into old age, the pace of his days slowed, but the movement of his thoughts did not stop. Memory became a companion, sometimes gentle, sometimes insistent, replaying moments of effort, conflict, and restraint. What changed was how he carried those memories. They no longer demanded defense. They asked only to be understood. One clear historical fact grounds this period. Adams lived into his 90s, long enough to witness the young republic stabilize, fracture, and stabilize again. He saw new generations rise, men who had not known the revolution as lived experience, but as inherited story. This distance altered his relationship with history. He was no longer inside it. He was alongside it. There is a small, human detail that captures the texture of these years. Adams developed a habit of rereading old letters, his own and others, sometimes correcting margins, sometimes smiling at turns of phrase that once felt urgent. The act was not nostalgic in the simple sense. It was reflective. He was measuring how much of his younger intensity still felt necessary, and how much could finally be set down. Some biographers still wonder about an open question here. Did Adams ever fully forgive himself for the choices that cost him admiration and power? The evidence suggests a partial answer. He did not absolve himself easily, but he no longer punished himself relentlessly. Age introduced mercy, where youth had demanded perfection. Physically, his body weakened. Hearing faded. Walking slowed. Yet the mind remained sharp, sometimes fiercely so. He followed politics closely, offering opinions that were still blunt, still principled, but now tinged with humor and distance. The stakes felt different. History would do what it would do, with or without his approval. As you listen now, the tone of the story softens further. There is no urgency left here, no argument waiting to be won. Adams' life is no longer a series of decisions under pressure. It is a long, extended reflection on what it means to act responsibly when outcomes cannot be guaranteed. This stage of the story carries a quiet reassurance. A life lived in vigilance does not have to end in vigilance. Attention can loosen. Judgment can rest. Even a mind trained for discipline can learn, slowly, to allow silence. The night welcomes this gentler rhythm. Adams is no longer resisting chaos or guarding principles. He is observing continuity, the way institutions outlast individuals, and how restraint, once practiced, becomes part of the world, even when its author fades from view. In the long evenings of his later years, John Adams often found himself sitting with the quiet rather than filling it. The habits of vigilance were still there, but they no longer pressed so hard. Silence, once uncomfortable, had become familiar. It carried memory, but it also carried release. One clear historical fact anchors this stage. Adams lived long enough to see peaceful transfers of power become routine in the United States, an outcome far from guaranteed when the Republic was born. Elections came and went. Disagreements sharpened and softened again. The system, fragile as it was, continued. For Adams, this endurance mattered more than personal legacy. There is a small human detail that captures how he related to this continuity. He followed political news with interest, but rarely with urgency. When outcomes disappointed him, he complained privately, often with humor rather than outrage. He no longer felt compelled to intervene. Watching the Republic function without him was both humbling and reassuring. Some biographers still ask an open question here. Did Adams feel replaced or relieved by the knowledge that the nation no longer depended on his restraint? His letters suggest a mixture of both. He missed the clarity of necessity, but he took comfort in irrelevance. If institutions could hold without him, then his earlier sacrifices had not been in vain. Emotionally, this was a period of quiet settling. Old grievances softened, not forgotten, but no longer sharp. Pride loosened its grip. Adams became more willing to acknowledge that history would remember him imperfectly, if at all. And that, surprisingly, felt acceptable. As you rest now, this part of the story invites a gentle recognition. Some lives are not meant to be celebrated loudly. They are meant to hold things together until celebration becomes possible for others. Adams's irreplaceability did not come from brilliance or inspiration. It came from timing, temperament, and refusal. He stood firm when collapse was tempting, and stepped aside when holding on would have caused harm. That balance, rare and difficult, was his quiet contribution. The night holds this understanding easily. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. Only the slow assurance that steadiness, once practiced, can echo long after the one who practiced it has learned how to rest. As John Adams approached the final chapter of his life, the sharp outlines of ambition, resentment, and duty softened into something more spacious. The days no longer asked much of him. The nights came earlier, and with them came a different kind of thinking, less urgent, less corrective, more accepting of what could not be changed. One clear historical fact frames this closing phase. John Adams died on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of American independence, the same day as Thomas Jefferson. The coincidence has often been noted, but for Adams the meaning was quieter. It marked not triumph, but completion. A life that had begun under borrowed authority ended in a nation that could stand on its own. There is a small human detail that brings this moment close. In his final days, Adams drifted in and out of awareness, still thinking of the Republic, still thinking of Jefferson. His last recorded words reflected an assumption that his old rival lived on. Even at the end, Adams's mind remained oriented toward continuity rather than self. He did not center his own departure. He centered the endurance of what they had built. Some biographers still ask a gentle, unresolved question here. Did Adams die feeling understood by history, or simply at peace with misunderstanding? The evidence leans toward the latter. He never fully trusted admiration. What mattered more was that the system had survived. That restraint, once exercised, had become habit. As you listen now, the story begins its final settling. There are no new facts to carry, no arguments to hold. Adams's life no longer presses forward. It spreads out behind him, its meaning no longer fixed, but stable enough to rest upon. What remains is influence without instruction. You encounter it whenever power transfers without violence, whenever restraint is chosen over escalation, whenever someone accepts unpopularity to protect something larger than themselves. Adams does not appear by name in those moments. He does not need to. The tone softens further. Sentences lengthen. Thoughts slow. A man who spent his life bracing against instability finally releases his grip. Not because the world is perfect, but because it no longer needs him to hold it together alone. You can let that idea drift now. No need to hold it. No need to judge it. Just notice how steadiness, practiced long enough, becomes part of the background. Quiet, dependable, and ready to let you rest. After death enters the story, it does not end it. For John Adams, the final measure of his life is not found in his last days, but in the way his choices continued to shape a world that no longer spoke his name aloud. One clear historical fact anchors this reflection. Many of the norms that define modern American governance, peaceful transfers of power, civilian control over conflict, the expectation that leaders restrain themselves, were not guaranteed by law alone. They were stabilized by precedent. Adams's presidency, especially in moments when escalation was possible but avoided, helped set those precedents in place. This influence is easy to overlook because it does not announce itself. You do not see Adams when a nation steps back from war rather than toward it. You do not hear him when leaders choose procedure over impulse. His presence is structural, not theatrical. There is a small human detail that helps make this clearer. In his later letters, Adams often warned that republics do not usually fail from a single dramatic blow, but from exhaustion. When restraint is mocked, when moderation is mistaken for weakness. These were not abstract worries. They were distilled from experience. He had watched how quickly enthusiasm could turn reckless. Some historians still pose an open question here. Would Adams' approach to leadership be tolerated in a world that rewards charisma more than caution? The question remains unresolved, not because it lacks evidence, but because it forces discomfort. Adams's example suggests that what holds systems together is often the opposite of what attracts attention. In everyday life, this legacy appears quietly. It is there when rules matter more than personalities. When losing an election does not become an existential crisis. When someone in authority chooses not to act simply because they can. These moments rarely feel historic. That is precisely the point. As you rest now, the story asks less of you. It no longer invites analysis. It invites noticing. The way stability often depends on people willing to be disliked. The way endurance often belongs to those who do not demand recognition, John Adams did not design a perfect system. He helped give an imperfect one time to breathe. And sometimes, that is the most irreplaceable contribution of all. The Knight holds this understanding gently. It does not require agreement or admiration. It simply allows the idea to settle, the way foundations do, unseen but steady enough to trust. As John Adams's life recedes fully into history, what remains is not a single lesson, but a pattern, a way of behaving under pressure that continues to surface quietly, especially when circumstances are tense and choices feel narrow. One clear historical fact helps frame this reflection. Modern constitutional democracies rely not only on written laws, but on unwritten norms, habits of restraint, respect for process, and acceptance of loss. These norms are fragile. They survive only because certain individuals, at critical moments, choose not to push their advantage. Adams was one of those individuals. There is a small human detail that makes this pattern feel close rather than abstract. Adams never believed he was building a legacy. He believed he was preventing damage. This orientation toward avoidance of harm rather than pursuit of glory shaped how he acted again and again. It is also why his influence feels diffuse. Prevention rarely leaves monuments. Some scholars still raise an open question here. Is Adams remembered less vividly because his greatest successes were events that never happened? The war that did not come? The power that was not seized? The precedent that quietly held? History struggles to celebrate absences, even when those absences change everything. In everyday life, this pattern appears in subtle ways. When someone chooses not to escalate a conflict at work, when a leader accepts a loss rather than undermining a process, when restraint feels unsatisfying but necessary. These choices rarely feel heroic in the moment. They often feel disappointing, even lonely. Adams would have recognized that feeling immediately. As you listen now, the story grows even quieter. There is no longer a person to follow, no events to track, only a posture toward power, a way of standing that does not demand attention, but earns trust over time. The Knight is well suited to this kind of understanding. It does not arrive with force. It settles slowly, like an awareness you do not need to act on. You can simply notice how much of the world's stability depends on people who resist the urge to be decisive, when decisiveness would cause harm. John Adams lived that resistance, not elegantly, not effortlessly, but consistently. And consistency, practiced long enough, becomes invisible, woven into expectations, absorbed into systems, and carried forward by people who may never know its origin. As the story approaches its final stretch, John Adams no longer feels like a historical figure moving through time. He feels more like a presence that lingers, quiet, firm, and almost deliberately understated. By now, his life has dissolved into habits and expectations that continue without needing his name attached to them. One clear historical fact anchors this near-closing reflection. The American system Adams helped stabilize outlived him not because it eliminated conflict, but because it normalized disagreement without collapse. Elections continued. Power changed hands. Institutions bent, but did not break. This continuity was never guaranteed in the 18th century. It had to be practiced before it could be trusted. There is a small human detail from Adams's later reflections that fits gently here. He once suggested that posterity would misunderstand him, and he seemed strangely at ease with that possibility. Being correctly understood had never been his true aim. Preventing damage had been. If misunderstanding was the price of stability, he was willing to pay it. Some historians still ask a lingering question at this stage. Did Adams' personality make him uniquely suited to be overlooked? His lack of charm, his impatience, his refusal to flatter, all made him easy to sideline in popular memory. Yet those same traits made him resistant to temptation. He did not know how to perform greatness. He only knew how to guard responsibility. This is where the idea of being irreplaceable quietly reveals itself. Adams was not irreplaceable because no one else could have held office. He was irreplaceable because, at a fragile moment, someone with his exact temperament, anxious, stubborn, serious, was willing to choose restraint when others were eager for action. Temperament matters in history more than we like to admit. In everyday life, you can sense this influence in moments that feel almost boring. When a process is followed instead of bypassed, when an authority figure steps back rather than asserts dominance, when frustration is absorbed rather than released. These moments rarely feel meaningful while they are happening. They only become visible when they fail to occur. As you rest now, the story no longer asks you to follow arguments or remember facts. It invites a softer awareness that some lives matter not because they shine, but because they hold. They absorb pressure. They buy time. John Adams bought time, again and again, often at the cost of affection, praise, and peace of mind. And in doing so, he made it possible for others to inherit a system sturdy enough to argue within, rather than fight against. The Knight holds this thought easily. You do not need to admire it. You do not need to apply it. You can simply let it be, like a foundation beneath a building you did not design, but trust enough to sleep inside. The story now reaches its last quiet place. Not a conclusion, but a settling. John Adams's life no longer moves forward or backward. It spreads out gently, like a landscape at dusk, where nothing more needs to happen for meaning to remain. One clear historical fact softly frames this ending. The republic Adams served endured beyond its founders, precisely because it learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to survive disagreement without collapse. This endurance did not belong to any single person, but it depended, at crucial moments, on people willing to absorb tension rather than release it destructively. Adams was one of them. There is a small, human detail that feels especially fitting here. In his later years, Adams took comfort in ordinary routines, meals taken at familiar hours, walks taken along the same paths, letters written with deliberate care. After a life spent bracing against instability, repetition felt kind. Predictability felt earned. Some scholars still leave us with one final open question. If Adams had been warmer, more charming, more beloved, would he have acted differently when restraint was required? The question lingers because it cannot be answered. Temperament and choice were intertwined. His anxieties made him cautious. His caution made him slow. His slowness prevented damage. And perhaps that is enough. As you listen now, the tone becomes softer still. There are fewer edges here. No arguments remain. The figure of John Adams fades not into legend, but into background, into the quiet expectation that systems should hold, that power should pass, that restraint is sometimes the highest form of care. You do not need to remember his dates or his titles. You do not need to admire him. You only need to notice how much of the world's stability depends on people who choose responsibility over recognition. The night welcomes this recognition without urgency. Thought loosens, attention softens. The story no longer asks to be followed. It asks only to be released. John Adams lived a life of vigilance. You do not need to. You can let the steadiness he practiced do its work in the background now, holding things together quietly, while you rest. The story has finished its work. Nothing more needs to be carried forward. You can let the ideas drift, the way long-held responsibilities finally loosen when they are no longer required. John Adams' life, so shaped by tension, discipline, and restraint, can fade gently into the background where foundations belong. If thoughts arise, you do not need to follow them. If judgments appear, you do not need to resolve them. The night does not ask for clarity. It asks only for rest. You might notice your breathing slow, each breath arriving without effort, without correction. The body knows how to settle, even when the mind has spent years staying alert. Some people spend their lives holding things together, so others can sleep more easily. Tonight, you are allowed to be on the other side of that exchange. Let the quiet do what it does best. Let the steadiness remain without attention. Let the weight set itself down. Nothing more is required of you now.